On March 17, 1943, within a quiet, wood-paneled office in Berlin, a German admiral held a seemingly impossible report. This single sheet of paper, a summary of raw intelligence, was more explosive than a 1,000-pound bomb. It described an American factory, an ocean away, projected to soon produce a 4-engine heavy bomber every 60 minutes. To the German high command, this was a laughable piece of American propaganda. But to the spies who had risked their lives, it was a death sentence written in numbers. It was the day they knew with chilling certainty that the war was lost. This is the story of a devastating truth too terrifying for Adolf Hitler to believe, and how denying a single fact sealed the Third Reich's fate. At the heart of the Nazi war machine, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, was an oddity. He was a man who lived by cold, hard facts. Unlike the fanatics in Hitler's inner circle, Canaris was an old-school professional, a patriot who saw the world through the clear glass of strategic reality, not the warped lens of ideology. His loyalty was to Germany, and his duty was to provide the unvarnished truth. In the war's early years, his Abwehr had been key to Germany's blitzkrieg victories, but by early 1943, the mood was changing. The disaster at Stalingrad and the pressure in North Africa signaled that the tide was turning. Yet, a dangerous sense of invincibility lingered at the top. Hitler, isolated in his Wolf's Lair headquarters, was increasingly detached, surrounded by yes-men who filtered out bad news. He believed victory was a matter of sheer will. Into this echo chamber, Admiral Canaris was about to pour a bucket of ice-cold water. He understood the grim arithmetic of modern war, a collision of economies, a brutal equation of steel, oil, and aluminum. From his global intelligence web, he was seeing numbers that terrified him, numbers suggesting Germany was about to be buried by an industrial avalanche. The intelligence was a slow, creeping dread built from whispers and coded messages. A businessman spoke of a U.S. factory so vast it had its own weather. A diplomat reported production targets with an extra zero. An engineer described an aircraft assembly line moving with the speed of car manufacturing. The reports all pointed to one place, a massive complex in Michigan called Willow Run. They all made the same ridiculous claim. The Ford Motor Company was applying automobile mass production techniques to the B-24 Liberator heavy bomber, aiming to produce one every single hour. To the German mind, this was impossible. A B-24 was an 18-ton behemoth. German factories took weeks, sometimes months, to produce a comparable bomber. The idea that Americans, a nation mocked in Nazi propaganda, could build such a weapon in 60 minutes was insulting. Canaris and his officers did the math. One bomber an hour meant over 700 a month from one factory. At the time, the entire German aircraft industry struggled to produce a fraction of that. The data was solid, confirmed by spies and even Germany's Japanese allies. But how could a workforce of what the Nazis considered inferior people, women, African Americans, immigrants, achieve this? The alternative to it being a lie was too horrible to consider. That the war was a war of factories, and Germany had already lost. Half a world away, the impossible was becoming real. Ford and his production chief, Charles Sorensen, deconstructed the B-24 into manageable subassemblies. Each worker was trained for a single, repetitive task, allowing the plant's apprentice school to churn out thousands of new workers every week. And who were these workers? They were a direct contradiction of Nazi ideology. At its peak, Willow Run employed over 42,000 people. Nearly a third were women, the iconic Rosie the Riveters. The workforce was a tapestry of America. Over 9% of the workers were African American, and another 3% were classified as disabled, all working side by side. This was the society Hitler mocked, and they were about to outproduce the so-called master race at a rate that defied belief. Armed with this terrifying truth, Admiral Canaris faced his biggest challenge. Penetrating the ideological fortress around Adolf Hitler, a wall of arrogance whose chief architect was Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. As head of the Luftwaffe, Göring saw himself as the ultimate authority on air power. When Canaris presented the findings on Willow Run, Göring's reaction was laughter. "Americans cannot build airplanes," he famously sneered. "They are very good at refrigerators and razor blades." This perfectly summarized the Nazi worldview. Americans were a decadent consumer society, a mongrel race lacking the discipline of the German people. To accept Canaris's report would have been a devastating admission of failure for Göring. So the report was buried under his immense ego. The next step was to get the information to the Führer himself. In the paranoid atmosphere of Hitler's headquarters, reality was whatever he decreed it to be. When confronted with the production figures, 1 bomber an hour, Hitler's reaction mirrored Göring's, but with pure venom. The numbers were inflated fantasies, Jewish propaganda. His own armaments minister, Albert Speer, later admitted he knew that if the numbers were even half accurate, Germany was doomed. But to say so in 1943 would have been suicide. The admiral's warning was not just ignored. It was seen as a symptom of defeatism. The men who brought the truth were now seen as weak. The truth was rejected, and in that moment of supreme ideological blindness, the fate of millions was sealed. The consequences were inevitable. Believing their own hype, the German high command funneled resources into strategically insignificant wonder weapons, while the prophecy of Willow Run came true. By 1944, the trickle of Allied bombers became a flood. The B-24 Liberators rolling off the line in Michigan were now blotting out the German sky. In February 1944, the Allies launched Big Week, an all-out assault on the German aircraft industry. Thousands of bombers, many from Willow Run, pounded factories. The Luftwaffe rose to defend its home and was systematically annihilated. For every German fighter lost, there was a trickle of replacements. For every American plane lost, 10 more were crossing the Atlantic. The cities Göring had promised would never be bombed were being reduced to rubble. The unstoppable Wehrmacht was being pounded into submission by the output of a single factory. Its leaders had laughed at "So what happened to the man who tried to sound the alarm?" For Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the price of telling the truth was steep. In Hitler's paranoid court, being a realist sounded like being a traitor. His accurate reports were seen as proof that he was spreading enemy propaganda. Horrified by SS atrocities, Canaris also used his position to shield members of the German resistance. After the failed July 20, 1944 plot to assassinate Hitler, the Gestapo investigation led to the Abwehr. Canaris was arrested. His diaries revealed the depth of his opposition. On April 9, 1945, in the final chaotic weeks of the war, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was slowly strangled to death with piano wire at Flossenbürg concentration camp, murdered by the regime he had tried to save from its own blindness. When the guns fell silent, the final numbers proved how right he had been. The report from 1943 wasn't just accurate. It was an understatement. At its peak, Willow Run produced a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. A single American factory produced more 4-engine heavy bombers than the entire German aircraft industry did during the whole war. The U.S. manufactured over 300,000 military aircraft. Germany produced around 94,000. The German failure wasn't one of spying. The agents did their job. It was a failure of acceptance, a total cognitive collapse at the highest levels. Blinded by their own propaganda, the Nazi leadership was defeated not by a secret weapon, but by simple arithmetic. They were buried by an avalanche of steel and aluminum forged by the very people they disdained.